Hi. Today we're going to talk about the object cause of desire. Today we're going to talk about something that's a little bit esoteric, something that I've researched a lot. There's a psychotherapist, philosopher named Jacques Lacan, and he came up with a term for the thing that actually drives us, the object cause of desire, and he calls it object petit a, and we call it object small a. And he didn't want it to have a definition. He wanted it to operate how an X and a Y operate in an algebra problem. And so he thought that object small a is the object cause of desire, meaning that's really what we want in this world. Someone who studies Lacanian philosophy is Slavoj Žižek, and he's one of my favorite speakers and philosophers. And he describes the object small a as the excess enjoyment of something we think that we want. So you can think of it like blueberry pie. Let's say you really enjoy blueberry pie. How many pieces of blueberry pie would it take for you to stop enjoying blueberry pie? How many pieces of blueberry pie would it take for you to hate blueberry pie? And that's sort of what object small a is. The excess enjoyment is the idea that there is something negative associated with every positive desire that you have. And so philosophers have had different words for this throughout history. Freud called it the death drive. The Buddha called it suffering, craving and aversion. Basically, it's the craving and aversion cycle where you think you want something, you get that thing, you realize you didn't want it, or you realize that there are actually a lot of negatives to that thing that you've achieved. One of my favorite stories to explain this is the story of the fisherman at a port. And so a businessman comes down and finds a young man fishing on the beach, and he's just relaxing and enjoying his day. And the businessman says, "Hey, do you sell these fish back at the village, or why are you fishing here during the day?" And the kid says, "No, I just like to fish. Sometimes I'll sell a couple if I catch too many, but usually it's just for me and my family. I just catch some fish and hang out." So the businessman says, "Well, why don't you just spend your time being more productive and try to catch as many fish as possible? Then you can afford a net." And the young man says, "Well, what would that do for me?" And he says, "Well, if you could catch more fish, then you can eventually save up enough money to buy a boat. And then you could go out on the boat, catch even more fish." And the young man says, "Yeah, well, what would that do for me?" And the businessman says, "Well, then you can hire a bunch of employees and they can go out on the boat and you can catch even more fish, and eventually you'll have enough money that you can afford to just relax on the beach all day." And the young man says, "I relax on the beach all day right now." And so that's an example of the wild desire that people think that they have versus the actual desire that people have. The businessman's ultimate goal would be to raise up enough money to be able to relax all day on the beach. The young man explains to him, "You don't need to raise a lot of money to be able to spend all day on the beach." And so these two guys have the same ideal goal, which would be resting on the beach all day. But they have two wildly different opinions on what it takes to get there. And so the businessman's desire, is his desire actually to lie on the beach all day? Probably not. He thinks that he's working towards being able to relax on the beach all day. But really what he's doing is he has a desire for money, he has a desire for power, he has a desire for influence over his community, he has a desire for prestige. And if his actual desire was to rest on the beach all day, he could do that anytime he wanted. And so when we talk about our desires, we have to understand what we really want and what we really, really want. Just like the example with blueberry pie and the example with fishing, things that we think that we want come with a downside. And that downside is usually that if we get too much of what we think that we want, it becomes harmful. Another example is alcohol. If you're a young kid and either smoking or alcohol, if you're a young kid and you see adults drinking beer, if you see adults smoking cigarettes and you try it, the first time you smoke a cigarette, you start coughing, you might even throw up. The first time you drink beer, if you've ever seen a kid take his first sip of beer, they usually think it's disgusting and they don't want to drink it anymore. And so alcohol and smoking are learned desires. Those are things that adults think that we want where if we just wanted actually pleasant things to drink all day, we could just drink fruit juice or milkshakes and things like that. But we like the idea that there's a downside to the products that we are taking in. So people who smoke know that it's killing them slowly. People who drink alcohol, if they drink too much of it, know that that's going to rot their liver and their brain and kill them. Why then are smoking and alcohol multi-billion-dollar industries? Every small town now has a brewery or a distillery, and people enjoy these, what we call vices, as something pleasurable in moderation. And so that's the object cause of desire. We think that we want something, we actually desire something else, and the motivation for that desire is something completely different. So if you're investigating your life, if you go to psychotherapy, if you see a regular therapist, then they'll explain to you, these are the actions that you're taking. These are the reasons you're taking those actions. But there's actually a different motivation that's below the surface, and that's what you have to investigate in order to find happiness. The way we do that through meditation is by taking that same process, but in our own minds. While we're meditating, we can think, okay, what is it that I am craving right now? What is the craving in my life? What is it that I actually want? Why is that actually an aversion? Why do I get too much of it and then I become sick? Why do I strive for money when I know that what I really want is time with my wife? Once you're able to set these motivations up properly, recognize what your true motivation is, then you can set the actions in your life in a more moderate, directed way. That's the lesson we can learn from discovering what our object small a is. Each person has their own object cause of desire. What is it that you really want? How can you make it so that that's a good desire? And how can we build our lives towards achieving that goal in a positive way? So if you have any questions about this, please leave a comment. If you want to see me talk about a certain topic in a future video, you can email me or visit my website, adamstivers.com. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell if you want to have updates about future videos. I've been releasing daily meditation videos in addition to my insights, and I hope that you join me in my practice as we go on our journey to find what really motivates us and find a real positive outcome based on positive motivations. Thanks.